So, orcs, not in the Monster Manual. So if we go to the Monster Manual in D&D Beyond, which is the only place I have it, I know there are people that get stuff, like the books beforehand, but I'm not special. I don't get the books beforehand. I'm a pleb like everybody else. I have to buy the crap, and then I get it when everybody else gets it. But if you go to the Monster Manual, what you're going to notice, there are no orcs in the Monster Manual. They're just gone. They're just gone. And some people are getting upset about that. And we'll get into why they're probably getting upset. But I think that one of the things is that's being overlooked is the fact that most of the humanoids have been removed from the Monster Manual. If you look through this list of all the different creatures in here, you're going to see there are no drow, dark elves. There are no gnomes. There are no dwerger. What else did they take out? Oh, I had a list over here. I think those are the big ones. Drow, gnomes, and dwerger. And the other humanoids that are in this list, the traditional humanoids like goblins, hobgoblins, kobolds, lizard folk. Well, actually, kobolds were never humanoid to begin with. Kobolds, I think, were, what do they call them? Draconian dragons or something? I don't know. That was their type. But the other things like goblins and hobgoblins and lizard folk, they have changed from being humanoid to being a different creature type. Goblins and hobgoblins are now fey. Lizard folk are now, I think they made them elementals. Am I remembering this correctly? Lizard folk, let's just click on it and we'll find out. Lizard folk, yes, lizard folk are now elementals. Actually, let's double check kobolds because that makes me wonder if they made kobolds elementals. Where are kobolds? Kobolds, here we go. Kobolds became dragons. Okay, kobolds are dragons. All right, they did. They left them as dragons, which makes sense because they weren't humanoid before. So a lot of the traditional monsters are no longer in the list, are no longer in the Monster Manual. And so obviously the question is why? Why would they just take them out? I feel like it seems like folks are focusing on the fact that orcs aren't in there, but that has to do with previous things that have happened regarding orcs in like recent-ish years or longer in the past. And so there's a hyper focus on orcs not being in there, when the fact is that there's lots of humanoid races that have been removed from there. And so let's talk about the general reason, I think, why they've been removed first, and then we could talk about orcs and their particularities in a moment. I have no idea why lizard folk are elementals. It makes no sense to me. Somebody's asking about it. I have no idea. It seems nonsensical. I think they were really stuck because lizard folk really are humanoids. I think that what they kind of they painted themselves into a corner in a way, because I think that it looks like, from what I can see from a cursory examination, is they set out to, I think, have no humanoids in the Monster Manual. That's what it looks like. If there is a humanoid, if somebody in chat knows of a humanoid that's still in the Monster Manual, that the creature type is listed as humanoid, please let me know what it is. I would just let me know. That'd be great. Because it looks to me, just from the examination that I've done and that Zach, the guy who works for me, has done, that they've taken humanoid out of the Monster Manual. And so when you make a flat rule of there will no longer be no humanoids in the Monster Manual, you're going to come up with these edge cases like lizard folk where you're like, what do we do with them? Like, are they dragons? Are they draconian? Lizard folk. Geez. Are they animals? No, because they have like a humanoid intelligence. Oh, there we go. We just use that word humanoid. Okay, but we don't want to call them humanoids. We got to call them something else. You know, so what do we call them? Elemental makes zero sense whatsoever. I don't know what was going on over there at their offices. They flipped a coin. Maybe there were two interns that were warring it out and they did rock, paper, scissors, or whatever the kids these days do to determine disputes. I don't know. They like saw who could smoke a vape the fastest. I don't know how they settle these disputes now for the little kids and stuff. But somehow the person whose dog in the race was elemental won for lizard folk, and it makes no sense whatsoever. Unless there's something in the lore. I don't know. I haven't read the lore. Maybe I'm just being obtuse and there's something in the lore that explains it now, and they've changed the lore around it. But from what I know about lizard folk, being an elemental doesn't make any sense. But hey, what do I know? So I think I'm just spitballing. I think they paint themselves into a corner, and they had to pick something, and somebody won the bet or whatever, and it became elemental. That's my guess. They had to pick something, but they should have just gone with dragon. I think that would have made a little bit more sense. Yes, Squeaky is the biter. This is the biter, and there's Squirty Pie. Squirty Pie is the loudmouth. She's the one that whines and cries. Like if I touch her, she will cry. See, I'm just very gentle, nice, light, loving touch, a loving caress, and she's a loudmouth. She whines and cries. Yeah, that's what she does. Okay, so why do we think, or what do I think? Humanoids have been removed from the Monster Manual. It looks like part of their motivation is to avoid overlap between the player handbook and the Monster Manual. So what you find is that creatures that are playable races, I guess they call them species now. I'm going to call them races until the day I die, more than likely, because I'm old and that's just the way it works. But creatures that are now playable races that players can play, those like orcs, players can play orcs, gnomes, dwerger. I'm pretty sure dwerger are in the player handbook. I could be wrong, but dwarves certainly are. Gnomes, elves, humans, all of the playable races are not going to be in the Monster Manual. Instead, what they have in the Monster Manual are generic NPC blocks. So for instance, if we go back to the thing over here, I'm going to zoom in a little bit because this is probably too small for you to actually read what I'm even looking at. So if you go over here, you're going to find that the Monster Manual at the very end of it does not have a big section for NPCs anymore. There used to be in the 2014 version, there was a big section for NPCs, no longer there. So now what you have is all of the humanoid types are scattered throughout the Monster Manual alphabetically. So there's an entire section on cultists. A whole bunch, don't bite me like that. A whole bunch of cultists, actually. There's some guards right here. There were some, I'm gonna scroll through and see if they jump out at me. Where were these guys? Performers, there's some performers over here. Those are typical NPCs. And then there was some other stuff over here or something. It's warriors, there we go, warriors. So there's a few different types of warriors. And I thought there was something else up here somewhere. I could have been wrong though. I thought there was another bit of them up here. Which is the downside of them not being at the end. In the knights, there we go. We got knights are up here. And that might be all of them. I probably overlooked a couple of them or something. But essentially what they're doing now is they want you to take these NPC blocks that are in the Monster Manual and the knight, for instance, or it could be one of the warriors. And this is a medium or small humanoid. So any humanoid which are in the player handbook could be this. So this could be a knight right here, could be an orc. It could be an elf, it could be a human, a gnome, etc., etc. That's the intention. And honestly, people have been really doing this forever. Like all of the NPC stat blocks in the 2024 Monster Manual, we've always been just changing them to be whatever race we wanted them to be, whether it was an orc, a half orc, an elf, a human, or whatever it was. And so really, I think they're just shifting completely toward that. And so it looks to me like they're making a delineation in saying that if a race is playable by characters, that is, it's in the player handbook, then it is not going to be in the Monster Manual. Instead, we're going to tell people to use these stat blocks, all right? And then if a monster is not playable by characters, then it will be in the Monster Manual and it will have specific unique stat blocks. So it really looks like that was the design decision that they made when creating the monster. Stop biting everything. You can't just sit there on my desk and bite everything. I'm yelling at him. I'm like whacking him on the head and he's like, I'm still gonna bite you. I'm gonna rough you up now. You're gonna get roughed up. That's right. So that looks like their design decision of why they did that stuff. And I mean, it makes sense to a certain point. It honestly, think about it. In the 2014, I'm gonna go back to my full camera. In the 2014 Monster Manual, how many different types of orcs did we have? We had the regular orc. I think we had an orc warrior. I think we had an orc chieftain. And then I think there was an orc shaman. I think we had 4 of them, but I might be wrong. I think maybe we only had 3. It might have been the orc warrior, the orc chieftain, and then the orc shaman. It was 3 or 4 of them. But now the way we have it, you essentially have all these NPC stat blocks and they're just telling you pick any one, it doesn't matter, right? And so you still have all of the versatility. There's perhaps a shade less of uniqueness because the orc is no longer there. And there's a bit less of uniqueness for like a drow now because the drow don't have their own stat blocks. So I think it's a mixed bag of good and bad perhaps, because there's definitely less uniqueness to the different races because they no longer are represented in the Monster Manual, right? Drow and orcs just use the same stat blocks, and then you can just add your own flavor to them based upon the lore of the creatures, which, okay, that's fine, I suppose. I don't think that it's my personal preferred method. I personally would probably rather just have some of these iconic creatures from D&D, such as drow and orcs and Dwerger. You know, I personally would probably rather have them have their own unique specific stat blocks of the Monster Manual, because I think it calls out just that, you know, I don't know, they just have this like unique legendary status as villains or something. And so it just seems appropriate that they'd have their own special stat blocks. When you just have them use every other NPC stat blocks, it just kind of like, what's the word? When it takes the flavor out of something, it homogenizes them a little bit, and it takes that feeling of this being special away from them a bit, and they don't feel quite so cool anymore. So I don't know. I think there's an argument to be made for that as well. But it definitely seems like why they did it at least made sense from like just an organizational standpoint of how they did the books and stuff. So I can kind of understand that. It makes sense to me. Whether you think that's good or not, I mean, that's just going to depend on, I don't know, your personal tastes, your prejudices, whatever. The baggage you bring to the table, I don't know, man. There you go. It dilutes it. Bland, generic. Those are some other good adjectives. Absolutely. And I think that's why I would rather have them be their own unique stat blocks, because it doesn't make them bland. It doesn't make them generic. And it keeps their uniqueness and that flavor and that awesomeness, you know? Like, I want the orc shaman, or the drow assassin or something, or the drow priestess, or the drow wizard. Like, I want those, you know? And when I just use a generic NPC stat block, it's like, eh. Oh yeah, we were going to talk about why people are complaining specifically about orcs, and why people are getting all worked up about orcs. From my understanding, and I don't keep totally up to date on all of these little tiny arguments that people have online and get all inflamed about, so take this with a grain of salt. This is just Luke's understanding. It seems to me that there was some concern that orcs were being portrayed in a way that somehow equated them to certain real world people groups in a negative way, and somehow they were perceived as there was the segment of people that were perceiving orcs as being portrayed in a racist way, because there were things about how orcs were portrayed that seemed to align with real world people groups, and because orcs were being portrayed in a negative way, that was therefore connotating and transferring over to the real world people groups, and so people were viewing the portrayal of orcs as racist. That's my understanding of why I don't know, a thing that's out there that was a contentious subject that people were kind of going back and forth on and stuff. I'm not super familiar with it, so I don't think I have a horse in that race. I'm going to claim ignorance on this topic, and it's probably safer for me to do that, in all honesty. So that, however, was a thing, and potentially still is a thing. And so I think, so based upon that, and that's something that happened during the D&D 2014 stuff, you know, like a year ago, 2 years, 3, 4 years ago, 5 years ago, whenever that all happened, that was a thing that happened, right? And so because that was a thing that happened, that there was a segment of people that didn't like orcs because of how they were being portrayed, and they thought it was racist, and there were other people who were like arguing the opposite, or they whatever their argument was and their stance was, you know, because there was this thing going on. Now what happens is when orcs are removed from the Monster Manual, it seems like there is a tendency to jump to the idea that the orcs are being removed because of the fact that they had this whole racist connotations or something that some folks were claiming and purporting there to be. And it in so pointing out the orcs and focusing on the orcs, I think it's overlooked that there were other races or species or whatever you want to call them that were also removed from the monster manual and ported over. I think that part of the reason that folks are getting a little, it seems to me at least, this is just my perception, and I don't have my ear to the ground as much as as you would think someone who works in this industry would, because I have way too much work to do to be paying attention to all of the different little arguments that go on here and there. But it seems to me that the reason orcs are being singled out as being not in the monster manual is that folks are coming with some baggage to the table and they're jumping to conclusions, which may or may not be true. I don't know. And that could have something to do with it. It absolutely could. I don't know. I mean, we do know that Wizards of the Coast removed the idea of half species from the player handbook, from the game. There are no longer half elves. There are no longer half orcs. And the lead game designer made a statement, probably on Twitter, but it's, from what I gather, he put his foot in his mouth and said his statement in probably the worst way possible that didn't communicate his intended meaning, which I can totally commiserate with, because that happens to everybody. Sometimes you say things that in the way that does not quite communicate the message the way you wanted the message to be communicated. But it turns out there was a whole thing about half elves being removed too, or half orcs being removed, you know. And I don't know, there was a conversation around racism around that or something that I'm not up to speed on, and I really can't comment on. I just know that it was a thing that happened. But again, I was too busy working to really get too deep into that stuff. Go check out Dungeon Drifters. There's a link in the description. One of our moderators will throw a chat to it as well. This is the board game that we're launching on Kickstarter in about 2 months. It'll launch in April. So this is super, super cool. I envision it's like a dungeon crawler. It's D&D adjacent in a way. Basically, you pick a character, you dive into dungeons, you defeat monsters, you gather all their loot, and you try to be the first to escape the dungeon with the most loot, essentially. So it's what do you call it? Not cooperative. Competitive. Talkie. It's a competitive game that you can play with your friends, casual gamers, family members that maybe aren't super into like heavy rules and complex setups and stuff like that. Just a little quick. Well, it's not a quick game. It usually takes about an hour and a half or so, maybe, for a game. But the point is that you can get in playing super fast. And we have crazy artwork for it as well. Like, I have a whole bunch of... You're in the way. These are like some of our prototype acrylic standees that we have for it. Full color artwork. These are prototypes. These are about twice as big as they're actually going to be. But we needed to get some prototypes so that we could take photos and crap like that for like marketing and stuff. So, but the artwork is stinking amazing in these things. So anyway, there's a link down in the description. You just click it. It'll take you to a page where you can learn more about the game. You can sign up to be notified when we go live. You can follow the Kickstarter page. And if you put down a $1 reservation, when you so you put down a $1 reservation before we launch, like you could do that like right now. And then when we do launch the project and you back, you're going to get a free miniature, Sylvan Arachne and his loot drop included with your pledge when you back. So you put down the $1 reservation now, today, or whenever, anytime before we launch in April, and you're fine. And then you're gonna get that free mini. And that $1 reservation goes toward your pledge as well. So it's literally just like, put this money now, it counts toward later, you get a free mini. It's like score.